There is a Harvard course, then this is hard to believe, look it up. There is a Harvard course that teaches medical students how to treat infants who identify as LGBT. Infants. How, there's this old saying, you can be so open-minded that your brains fall out. And there's a lot of brains laying around on the grounds of Harvard University. And so an infant who identifies as LGBT, an infant that can't talk, I mean, how do you get that stupid? How do you get that crazy? It's insanity. It is moral insanity, and they love it. So here's another article. Schools are indoctrinating kids in transgender insanity without parental consent. On January 5, the National Post published an extraordinary piece of reporting that has gotten very little attention, a revealing reaction. Written by Tom Blackwell, it is titled, How Canadian Schools Aid Students' Gender Transition Without Family Consent. And it lays out details of what is becoming standard practice in Canadian public schools across the country. We have been publishing articles on this trend here for several years, but Blackwell's reporting includes some truly stunning stories. The report begins by detailing how a Calgary teacher told a grade 6 class that their classmate had come out as transgender, but that they mustn't let slip their classmate's new gender identity to her parents, who did not know the student had begun identifying this way. In short, one mother told Blackwell kids were being taught to lie to their parents, 11-year-old kids. This scenario, however, is actually now standard practice in the public school system, Blackwell noted. But in some ways, the instruction flowed naturally of what has become a common policy throughout Canada. Boards of education, education ministries, and even the Public Health Agency of Canada are urging schools to both automatically honor a transitioning student's request to change their name and pronouns and to keep that information from parents as requested. In short, schools are not only affirming of transgender identification, as has been the case for some time, they are actively keeping information about children from parents on the presumption that parents might be a danger to their own children and that they, the government employees, are better suited and equipped to deal with these incredibly sensitive, life-changing, and potentially irreversible changes. Blackwell noted that health professionals applaud the developments while some parents of children with dysphoria are bristling. And so this goes on. There's a lot more to this article here, but it's in Canada, and this is also happening in the United States. And teachers' associations in the United States have come out openly saying, we know better how to teach your children than you know how to teach your children. And so right now in Minnesota, they're requiring teachers to affirm trans ideology to be able to get a license. So you can't be a teacher. You can't have a license in Minnesota if you don't go along with trans. Of course, we have the furries, the children coming to schools, animals, without the objection of the schools, because they say it's part of their queer identity. That's what they say. It's part of their queer identity that has to be protected. Drag queen story hours in libraries across America. Kirk Cameron, a champion. Kirk Cameron is a very strong Christian. He went to public libraries asking if he could have a story hour where he could read Bible stories to kids. He got permission, and some turned away by many of them. They want the drag queens, they just don't want the Christians. And we have woke churches across America and around the world. What I'm saying is, Jesus said it would be like birth pangs. Last week I talked about one generation. It's going to be one generation long, Joel 3, Matthew 24. Okay, that generation began in 1948 when Israel became a nation. Okay, look where we are today in the birth pangs of moral anarchy, the rebellion to God morally. And I'm just saying, I just never thought that I would live in a world like this. I never did. And so the days of Noah, Jesus said it's going to be like the days of Noah, the days of Lot. And when the angels came to get Lot and his family out of Sodom and Gomorrah, the men in that community wanted to have sex with them, the angels. And the angels struck them with blindness, and they got, Lot and his 2 daughters out. His wife became a pillar of salt. Remember that? But this is how morally depraved we are today in the society. This is Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, I think it was Billy Graham that says if God doesn't judge America, he'll have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And that was said about 20 years ago. So it's terrible. It's one of the signs of the end time. Thanks for watching this clip. To see the entire weekly Tipping Point show, join us today at endtimes.com for $7 a month.